Hey guys, and welcome back. I am so excited to be partnering with Arteza to bring you a few art supply reviews. Today, we're going to be going over the 24 color set of their premium tube watercolor paints. I'll be going over my first impressions and unboxing, things that I love, and things to consider. And I'll be showing you these paints in action with a time-lapse painting I worked on, so stay tuned. Here I'll be showing you me unboxing these paints and showing you a bit of time-lapse of swatching every color out on the paper I use most, the Canson XL watercolor, to see how they handle. But first and foremost, I did want to be completely transparent in mentioning that all these Arteza products were sent to me for free to test out to review for you guys. The only monetary gain I will receive at all is if you happen to like what you see and use the affiliate links I have down in the description. There also happens to be a coupon here for you guys to save a little bit of extra money if you're interested. Using that affiliate link doesn't mean you're charged any extra, but you can feel good that you're helping to support an independent artist and the content on this channel. Okay, back to mentioning that I am not paid to give these opinions and definitely won't be lying to you guys to make a sale. Okay, little side note, but did anyone play those games as a kid like Mafia or Werewolf where your ability to lie can actually help you manipulate the game and win, especially if you're the bad guy? Well, as much as I enjoyed playing those, I'm kind of awful at them because I just couldn't convince anyone when I was lying. Anyway, all opinions expressed here are 100% my own, no lies, because I basically am incapable. Okay, now that that's all out of the way, let me tell you a little bit about the company. Arteza is an art supply company striving to make art more accessible to everyone, which is why they have a wide selection of art supplies at affordable prices. Not cheap art supplies, but affordable to make sure that you get quality for money spent. I really like what they have to say on their About page about guaranteeing their products. Quote, "And if you ever find your art supplies to be unsatisfactory, we'll make it right. You can expect any concerns you have to be addressed quickly so you can get back to what really matters." I really love this idea and the general goals of the company. Anyway, on to my thoughts about these paints. Arteza has two premium watercolor tube sets, a 12 and a 24 set of colors. I was sent the 24 set, and to be honest, that is a lot of colors to keep track of, especially if you're just beginning in watercolor. When I started out, I bought 6 tubes in the Cotman Winsor & Newton range, 2 reds, 2 yellows, and 2 blues in a warm and a cool version to be able to mix just about any color you need. Being able to learn mixing was invaluable for me, learning color theory and using the paints. I will say that as I moved forward in my watercolor journey, I realized certain colors were near impossible for me to mix consistently. One in particular was purple. I've found in general that purples can be the hardest to mix. And one awesome thing about the 24 set is that they have not 1, but 2 purples. 3 if you count rose, which I basically do. Unfortunately, the 12 set comes with 0 purples, and this is honestly one of my big pet peeves with watercolor sets in general. But if purples are less important to you, and if you're just starting out and have no idea what you may like, then I would suggest the lower investment into the smaller watercolor set. If you've seen my other work, you'll know I love greens, and luckily there is a great selection in both sets, along with quite a range of blues and yellows in this set. In fact, I would say there may be too many yellows, especially since they are a bit difficult to differentiate on the paper. Here I also wanted to show a quick swatch that I did of every color on the Arteza watercolor paper and showed a little bit of the lifting qualities of every single color. So lifting color or lifting pigment off after it has dried on the paper is both a technique but also something that may be problematic if you're trying to layer your colors and have them stay put. I'll talk about this a little bit more later on in the video. So my final piece is on the Arteza paper, and I just sat down one night and quickly did this sort of wash of greens, blues, and yellows, and decided to sort of sketch something out, which ended up being this Princess Mononoke Ghibli-inspired piece with the red elk and little forest spirits with succulents, of course. I wanted to do something that was similar to the work I typically do, especially that I'm planning on selling, and so I wanted to see how everything held up. I did want to mention also that I was sent the watercolor paper and these water brushes that I will be using in this video, and I'm planning a separate review for those products because I find that reviews that have a little bit too many products all together can be a little hard to differentiate if you're looking for the watercolors or just the brushes or just the paper. So I have them all separated, but I am using all of the supplies for this piece. Another point I wanted to mention that you might have seen at the beginning was the information on the tubes themselves. I find it highly uncommon to have such a variety of information on paints outside of the sort of top professional lines that you see, like Schmincke or even Winsor & Newton. However, I realized quite quickly that there was no information anywhere about what any of these symbols mean, especially to someone starting out. From what I know from other brands, that the square symbol tends to show the opacity of the color, an empty square being the more transparent and full being more opaque or covering. And the letters and numbers appear to be categorizing the pigments used in each color. I am unsure of what the pluses mean, but I have an idea that this might indicate light fastness, but I would like to find more information about this. That all being said though, I am really impressed that this information is on each of these tubes, even if it's a bit frustrating to differentiate the information. The tubes themselves feel like artist or maybe student grade paints, but they have more of a metal tube rather than plastic, which feels a lot nicer. I also love how bright these colors are and how pigmented they appear to be. My main concern in regard to the type of painting that I do is how opaque most of these paints are, regardless of how these symbols are on each of the tubes. Just about every color there on my first swatch list is fairly opaque, as it covers just a little bit of that black line that I put down. Now, this isn't a deal breaker and is actually quite common for more affordable brands or lines of paints. Binders and other material is added to paints to get the right consistency, flow, and reaction. And straight pigment is expensive. Ways to make paints like this more affordable would be to add more of these materials, which could add to the thickness or the opaque qualities. I also put the paint down on these swatches very thickly at the beginning to try to see the range I could get. Regardless though, they do feel very pigmented, which is something that tends to lack in more affordable paints, so I'm very impressed by that. I thought this was a great piece to test these supplies with, since I got to play around with gradation of color, with how I painted the background, and could see how the paints play around on the paper, but I would also have a more controlled wet on dry technique on the characters and see how well the paints stay put when I need them to. So what I want to do for you guys is have a little list that I'm going to throw up of things to consider that you may or may not like about the paints, and then the things that were my favorite qualities. So let's start off with things to consider. So first, I noticed that colors seem to pick up easily even when they're dry on the paper. This means they were lifting up, and I showed you those swatches there at the beginning that the colors did lift up. Now, there's a couple different things going on with this quality. This can be really fantastic if you've made a mistake and you need to scrub a little bit to pick up a color, but since it's going to pick up most of the colors, that you need to be a little bit careful about. And if you're layering lots of different colors and you don't want the colors underneath to move around, that's just something to consider. Another thing is both sets have a black and a white, which is mostly just a personal preference. I was taught to mix black, and I don't love white all that much, although I did use it here a little bit just to test out since it was fairly opaque. The pigments did not flow like I expected, especially in the background. I felt like the colors kind of stayed put where they were put instead of flowing around and blooming here and there with the water. So that's just a little something to consider, and it could also mean something having to do with the paper itself. So I'm not actually quite sure. Another thing is the paints did crack on my palette once I left them to dry, and this again isn't necessarily a bad thing, but something to consider if you're going to have a palette that you're traveling with, things like that, that they might crack and could mix up a little bit, so you want to be a little bit careful there. Another thing to consider when you're building your watercolor palette and building yourself up as an artist is that these are not available as open stock. So you either have the 12 set or the 24, and if you've purchased the 12, you'll be repurchasing those 12 in the 24 set. And so this is something just to consider when you're looking at buying a set of watercolor paints. And you won't be able to buy individual tubes to fill in what you might be missing in your set. And lastly, we have the opacity of the paint itself. Just about every color was fairly opaque and was covering, which I used to my advantage a little bit with using the whites and some of the other colors to layer. And I was even thinking of being able to push my line work down just a little bit by having the green over top of the green pencil lines. But that ended up being kind of rough for me when I went over to try to outline each of them here with a fine liner. I had a really hard time seeing a lot of my lines, and I had only put a couple layers of the green paint down. So that is something to consider, but if you have very dark lines with your work and you don't mind having a little bit more of that opacity, then there you go. And on to my favorite qualities about these paints. First and foremost, a little goes a long way. I only put a little bit on my little palette, and I used a lot of the green and yellow, and I didn't have to squeeze out any more paint, which is a lucky thing for watercolor in general, but these still have quite a bit of paint on my palette. Number two, they re-wet very well. I know a lot of cheaper paints, you can have a little bit of a hard time getting the paint back up off of the palette, and I didn't have an issue with that. There's a lot of colors to choose from, especially from this 24 set, if that is something you're interested in, especially if you do more art journaling or other things like that, where you just want to have those pre-made colors. There's quite a few here for you. The pigments were all very bright as well, and I really enjoyed how bright all of them were. They were also really pigmented, which was very surprising for such an affordable brand of paint. And the pigment and other information on the tubes was a really nice touch that I wasn't expecting and felt very, very professional. There's also obviously lots of greens and purples in this set that I did mention was a selling point for me. And the last but certainly not least is that the price for these is really outstanding, especially if you're just getting started. So right now on their website, the 12 set is about $10 full price. I believe it's $9.99 US, and the 24 set is roughly $24 US, and that ends up being only $1 to $2 each tube, depending on which set you get. And that compared to if you've ever looked at other professional watercolors, that is an outstanding price for the amount of paint you get. So those are my thoughts on these paints, but let me know down below, have you tried these paints? Have you tried some of their other art supplies? Leave a comment down below and tell me what your thoughts are. And remember, if you are interested in any of these, I do have affiliate links down below, and I have 10% off if you buy through their store. So here is my final piece, a little bit of a close-up if you're interested in seeing that. And don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell if you want to make sure to not miss any more content from me. I would love if you wanted to join me on this art journey. And I wanted to say, as always, I hope you guys have a creatively fulfilled day, and I will see you next time. Bye guys!